Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The wind blew softly over the village of Elm's Rest, carrying with it the scent of pine and freshly turned soil. It was a quiet evening, the kind that Arlen often cherished, standing on the ridge overlooking the homes nestled below. From up here, he could see the whole village, the houses with thatched roofs, the fields stretching out to the edge of the forest, and the river winding its way toward the distant mountains. The wind always spoke to him, as if whispering ancient secrets that only he could hear. Arlen had been the village guardian for nearly 2 years now, a responsibility passed down from his father. Though he was still young, barely 20, the villagers trusted him. But Arlen, for all his quiet confidence, doubted himself. He wondered if he could ever live up to the expectations that came with being a protector. His father had been a legendary figure in the village, a man who could rally the entire community with a word and fend off threats with nothing but his sheer presence. Now it was Arlen's turn, and while he did his best to protect the village from wild beasts and occasional bandits, he had never faced the kind of challenges his father spoke of. Every day, he felt the weight of the responsibility more heavily, as if the wind itself were pressing down on him, reminding him that the world was far larger and more dangerous than the peaceful village of Elm's Rest could ever know. The Festival of Winds was just around the corner, a time when the village celebrated the turning of the seasons, thanking the winds for their guidance and protection. It was a tradition older than anyone could remember, one that connected the people of Elm's Rest to the mysterious forces of nature surrounding them. As the guardian, Arlen was expected to lead the ceremony this year, something that made him nervous. He had never been one for speeches or rituals, much preferring the solitude of the forest or the quiet strength of the mountains. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the village, Arlen turned to make his way back down the hill. The wind shifted, carrying with it a sound, a voice, almost. He paused, listening carefully. It was faint, barely audible, but it was there. He had heard the wind speak before, though never so clearly. It wasn't words exactly, but a sense, a feeling. Follow. The word hung in the air, as if the wind itself had whispered it into his ear. Arlen frowned, glancing around. There was no one nearby. He was alone, as always. But the feeling was undeniable. Something was calling to him. With a deep breath, Arlen decided to follow the strange sense of direction the wind seemed to be giving him. He moved quickly down the hill, past the edge of the village, and into the forest. The trees rustled around him, their leaves whispering in a language he couldn't understand. The deeper he went, the more he felt a pull, an invisible thread guiding him through the underbrush. After what felt like hours, Arlen found himself standing before a stone shrine, overgrown with ivy and moss. It was ancient, forgotten by the village long ago. He had stumbled across it once as a child, though it had always seemed like just another relic of the past. Tonight, though, the shrine felt different. The wind swirled around it, as if waiting for him to approach. Cautiously, Arlen stepped forward. His heart pounded in his chest, but the wind kept guiding him, steady and sure. At the center of the shrine was a stone pedestal, and atop it lay a sword unlike any he had ever seen. The blade shimmered in the moonlight, its edges sharp and graceful, and the hilt was intricately carved with symbols he didn't recognize. It looked ancient, far older than anything in the village, yet it seemed untouched by time. He hesitated, but the wind urged him forward. Take it. His hand hovered over the hilt. As his fingers wrapped around it, a surge of energy rushed through him. The wind howled, spinning wildly around the shrine, and for a brief moment, Arlen felt as if he were being lifted off the ground, weightless. The sword hummed in his hand, vibrating with a power that seemed to resonate with the very air around him. Then, as quickly as it had come, the wind settled. Arlen stood alone in the stillness, the sword heavy in his grip. His heart raced, and he could feel someone, watching him. "Who are you?" a voice asked, soft yet powerful. Arlen spun around, but there was no one there. He was alone, except for the sword. The voice, he realized, hadn't come from outside but from within the blade itself. "I'm Arlen," he replied, unsure of who, or what, he was speaking to. A figure appeared before him, though it wasn't solid. It was made of wind and light, a faint silhouette of a woman with flowing hair and eyes that seemed to gleam with the same light as the stars. She smiled at him, her presence both comforting and awe-inspiring. "I am Zephyra, the spirit of the wind sword," she said. "You are its new wielder, chosen by fate. But know this, Arlen, this sword is no ordinary weapon. It carries with it the weight of the wind and the power to shape the very forces of nature. Only those with a pure heart can wield it. If your heart falters, so too will the sword." Arlen swallowed, his throat dry. "Why me? I'm just a village guardian." Because you were chosen," Zephyra interrupted. "The wind has guided you here for a reason. But be warned, Arlen. There are forces in this world that will seek to take this power from you. Darkness has long sought the wind sword, and now that it has a new master, it will come for you." Arlen's grip tightened on the hilt. "What do I have to do?" "You must learn to control the sword," Zephyra said, her form beginning to fade. "And you must protect your village. The darkness is already moving, and it will stop at nothing to destroy what you hold dear. But remember, the wind is with you. Trust it, and it will guide you." With that, Zephyra vanished, leaving Arlen standing alone in the shrine, the weight of the sword in his hand and the responsibility it carried settling heavily on his shoulders. As Arlen made his way back to the village, the sword strapped to his back, he couldn't shake the feeling of impending danger. The wind seemed different now, no longer a gentle breeze but a constant presence, whispering in his ear, urging him forward. The village was quiet when he returned, the festival preparations underway, but Arlen's mind was elsewhere. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. The crops that had been healthy and green started to wither, and a strange sickness spread through the livestock. The villagers grew uneasy, whispering about curses and omens. Arlen knew better. He could feel the darkness creeping closer, like a shadow on the horizon. One evening, as he stood by the village gate, keeping watch, a figure emerged from the forest. Tall and cloaked in black, the figure moved with an unnatural grace, as if gliding over the ground. Arlen's hand instinctively went to the sword at his side. "Who goes there?" Arlen called, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his gut. The figure stopped just outside the gate, the hood of his cloak hiding his face. "So, you are the one who has inherited the wind sword," the stranger said, his voice cold and echoing in the still night air. Arlen's grip tightened on the hilt. "Who are you?" The stranger chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "I am Malroke, servant of the one who seeks what you now possess. Hand over the sword, and I will spare your village." Arlen's heart pounded in his chest, but he stood his ground. "Never. This sword was entrusted to me. I won't let you take it." Malroke's eyes glowed beneath his hood, a sickly green light that sent a shiver down Arlen's spine. "Then you have chosen death, for yourself and for everyone you care about." With a flick of his wrist, Malroke summoned a horde of shadowy creatures from the darkness. They slithered and crawled out of the forest, their eyes glowing with malice. Arlen drew the wind sword, and as the blade gleamed in the moonlight, the wind rose, swirling around him, the battle that followed was unlike anything Arlen had ever experienced. The creatures lunged at him, their claws sharp and their movements erratic. But the sword moved with him, guiding his strikes, the wind itself seeming to bend to his will. Every time he swung the blade, a gust of wind followed, knocking the creatures back or slicing through them like a blade of its own, but no matter how many he cut down, more came. The village was under siege, and Arlen was the only one standing between his home and total destruction. His arms ached from the constant fighting, and the weight of the sword grew heavier with each passing moment. Malroke watched from the shadows, his eyes gleaming with dark amusement. "You cannot win, boy. The darkness is endless. You will fall, just as your father did." The mention of his father sent a jolt of anger through Arlen, but he quickly pushed it aside. Zephyr's words echoed in his mind, "Only those with a pure heart can wield it. If your heart falters, so too will the sword." He couldn't let his emotions get the better of him. He had to stay focused, had to trust in the wind, as Zephyr had said. Taking a deep breath, Arlen centered himself, letting go of his fear and anger. The wind responded, swirling around him with renewed strength. With a final, powerful strike, Arlen unleashed a whirlwind of energy that sent the remaining creatures flying into the darkness. The village was safe, for now, but the toll on Arlen was clear. He fell to his knees, exhausted, the sword still humming with power in his hand. Malroke sneered. "You may have won tonight, but this is far from over. The sorcerer will come for you, and when he does, not even the wind will be able to save you." Before Arlen could respond, Malroke vanished into the shadows, leaving only the faint echo of his laughter behind. The days that followed were tense. The villagers were shaken by the attack, though they didn't fully understand the true threat they faced. Arlen kept his distance, training in secret with Zephyr's guidance. The wind sword was powerful, but it required more than just brute strength to wield. It demanded focus, clarity, and a deep connection with the wind itself. Zephyr appeared to him often during his training, her form more solid now, as if the bond between them was strengthening. She taught him how to summon the wind to his aid, how to harness its power to create shields or strike down his enemies from a distance. But the more he learned, the more Arlen realized that the true strength of the sword came not from the wind, but from within himself. "You are the guardian of this village," Zephyr told him one evening as they stood on the ridge overlooking Elm's Rest. "But you are also the guardian of the wind. It has chosen you because your heart is pure, and because you have the strength to carry its burden." Arlen nodded, though doubt still gnawed at him. "But what if I fail? What if I'm not strong enough?" "You are strong enough," Zephyr said firmly. "But you must believe in yourself. The wind will always be with you, but you must trust in it, and in yourself." Arlen's training continued, but the shadow of the sorcerer loomed over him. He knew that Malroke had been sent by someone far more powerful, someone who wouldn't stop until they had the wind sword. And as the wind grew colder and the nights longer, Arlen felt the darkness closing in. The final battle came sooner than Arlen had expected. One night, as a storm raged over the mountains, the village was attacked again. This time, it wasn't just Malroke's creatures, it was the sorcerer himself. Cloaked in shadows, his eyes burning with malevolent power, the sorcerer descended upon the village like a force of nature. Arlen stood at the village gate, the wind sword glowing in his hand. The wind howled around him, fierce and untamed, as if the very elements were preparing for war. The sorcerer stepped forward, his presence darkening the air. "You have something that belongs to me, boy," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "The wind sword is mine by right. Hand it over, and I may spare your life." Arlen met the sorcerer's gaze, his heart pounding in his chest. "The sword belongs to no one but the wind. And I will not let you take it." The sorcerer's eyes narrowed. "Foolish boy. Do you think you can stand against me? I am the master of shadows, the bringer of darkness. I will crush you, and your village will burn." With a wave of his hand, the sorcerer unleashed a torrent of dark magic, shadows swirling toward Arlen like a storm. But the wind rose to meet it, forming a barrier around Arlen, shielding him from the attack. The battle that followed was nothing short of epic. The wind clashed with darkness, the storm raging around them as Arlen and the sorcerer fought. Every strike of the wind sword sent gusts of wind tearing through the air, while the sorcerer's dark magic sought to consume everything in its path. Zephyra was with him, guiding his movements, her voice steady and calm even in the midst of the chaos. "Remember, Arlen. Trust in the wind. Let it guide you." Arlen focused, his heart steady. The wind was with him, swirling around him like a living force. With a powerful strike, he sent a whirlwind of energy toward the sorcerer, but the dark figure merely laughed, deflecting the attack with a wave of his hand. "You are strong, boy," the sorcerer said, his voice filled with dark amusement. "But not strong enough. The wind sword's power is great, but it pales in comparison to the power of darkness." Arlen gritted his teeth, refusing to give in. "I won't let you destroy my village." The sorcerer sneered. "Your village? This pathetic place means nothing." "You mean nothing. The wind sword belongs to me, and I will take it, whether you live or die." With a roar, the sorcerer unleashed a massive wave of dark energy, and for a moment, Arlen felt the weight of it pressing down on him, threatening to crush him. But then, in the midst of the storm, he remembered his father's words, spoken so many years ago: "A guardian doesn't fight for glory or power. He fights for the people he loves, for the things that matter most." Arlen's heart steadied, and the doubt that had been gnawing at him disappeared. He wasn't fighting for himself. He was fighting for his village, for the people who had trusted him, for the land that had nurtured him. He wasn't alone. The wind was with him. With a final, powerful surge of energy, Arlen called upon the full power of the wind sword. The blade gleamed with an intense light, and the wind howled around him, rising to a crescendo. He swung the sword, and a whirlwind of energy erupted from the blade, slamming into the sorcerer with the force of a hurricane. The sorcerer screamed, his form breaking apart as the wind tore through him, scattering the darkness into nothingness. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the storm ceased. The wind settled, and the night was still. Arlen stood there, panting, the wind sword glowing softly in his hand. The village was safe, the darkness defeated. Zephyra appeared beside him, her form shimmering in the moonlight. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with pride. "The wind chose well." Arlen smiled, though exhaustion weighed heavily on him. "I couldn't have done it without you." "You are the guardian now, Arlen," Zephyra said. "The wind sword is yours. But remember, this is only the beginning. The wind is always moving, always changing. And so must you." Arlen nodded, understanding the truth in her words. He had won this battle, but there would always be more to come. The wind would guide him, as it always had, and he would stand as the protector of his village, of the land, and of the wind itself. The wind whispered softly through the trees as Arlen stood atop the hill, looking out over the village of Elm's Rest. The wind sword hung at his side, a constant reminder of the responsibility he now carried. The villagers below went about their lives, unaware of the dangers that had been averted, the darkness that had been vanquished. But Arlen knew. He knew that the wind would always be with him, guiding him, protecting him. And as long as he stayed true to himself, to the people he loved, and to the land he swore to protect, he would never falter. With a deep breath, Arlen turned and walked down the hill, the wind at his back, carrying him forward into whatever future awaited him.